And welcome back to another edition of Sanctified Reason. Sanctified Reason is a podcast where we talk about the issues that go on in this world that affect us, and we talk about them through a biblical perspective. I'm Sonn Eidem, along with Dan Delzell. Dan is a pastor at a church, Redeemer Church in Papillion, Nebraska. He's also an author of many articles on a lot of different subjects, of which you can find at the Christian Post and other places. And Dan, we recently had the Oscars roll through town out here in L.A. They were at the train station downtown, Union Station, and apparently they didn't go over too well because not too many people watched them. I think it was like a record low, which seems to be the running standard for a lot of things that Hollywood puts out now. All these award shows, record lows, a lot of TV viewerships, record lows. And so, so it doesn't seem like, things are working too well for that establishment. But it got me thinking, we all like to watch movies, and we like to watch different types of movies. And there's faith-based Christian movies, there's secular movies, and, there's a debate about what we should watch. But, there's a lot of good messages in movies, basically the point to what I want to get to. And so I thought, we could talk about maybe some of our favorite movies, maybe the messages in the movies, maybe any recommendations for movies, although I'm not really one to give out recommendations because my movies I tend to look through movies or look at movies through a different perspective than maybe the average consumer. Because I look at things differently. But anyway, so I thought we could just talk about it. Talk about some movies, talk about some messages in the movies. A movie that I really like that we can talk about in a little bit is Blue Like Jazz. I think it was a screenplay adapted from a book about a young Christian boy who grew up in the Christian home, and then some things in his life. He sees some contradictions, some hypocrisy maybe, and so he heads off to a liberal college in Oregon, and then his life experience that year at college. And then another of mine that I like to actually do promote and recommend is a movie called A Second Chance with Michael W. Smith, and it's about a mega church and their sister church, which is in the sister church is in the ghetto or in the poor part of town, and the relationship between the main church and the inner city church. And so that turns out I like that movie. It's a really good movie too. But when it comes to movies, when it comes to entertainment, we always talk about, protecting ourselves. I don't know if you remember that Sunday school song, if it ever crossed your paths with it, but remember it's be careful little eyes what we see, be careful little hands what we do, be careful little ears what we hear. And it's basically telling us to guard ourselves, right? Kind of a child's version of putting on the whole armor of God. So when it comes to movies, the first thing I'd ask you is that when you have these conversations, especially in the Christian world, first off, are secular movies okay to watch? And where do we draw the line with what type of so-called secular movies, if we can call them that, should we watch?
Yeah, Son, that gets challenging more and more so, I think, for Christians and Christian families these days. I think there need to be, some very healthy discussions that go on in homes as folks wrestle with that very question that you asked, because I know, like for myself, I was thinking about, my favorite movies, and I'd have to say, probably my top three, two of them, I think, present an amazing story about family. One is The Family Man with Nicolas Cage, and the other is The Greatest Showman with Hugh Jackman, who plays the part of P.T. Barnum. And then another movie I'd put maybe in my top three there, I just think it's hilarious, is What About Bob with Bill Murray. It came out a number of years ago. But yeah, I think there are a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are enough good options out there. If folks, for example, happen to subscribe to, let's say, the Disney Channel, there's a lot of good stuff. Or, I think about a fun movie with Robin Williams in it called Flubber. That was such a fun movie, a wholesome movie. Kind of a throwback, retro. The setting is going to be back in, probably the 60s or something. But just a fun movie, the whole concept, and Robin Williams is so funny in that. So, and then a lot of the just wonderful Christian movies that have come out. whether it be, Fireproof or War Room or, Pure Flicks. They produce some wonderful movies. So, as we know, Son, there's a ton of junk out there that comes out of Hollywood. And I think, if an individual Christian, an individual family, if they make a concerted effort to, set their minds on things that are wholesome, it can be done. It can be done. And there's some real, funny, creative stuff out there. And so like these three movies that I would put in my top three, I mean, I highly recommend those for folks. I'm sure we'll probably talk a little bit about those movies and other movies today. But yeah, I think it's definitely doable to be able to enjoy some of these different movies, and but also to really make a strong effort to not bring trash into your home, through the screen, because there sure is a ton of it out there.
I always had a hard time early on watching kind of faith-based Christian movies because they were just so horrible. They were horrible produced. The production value was terrible. Message might be good, but it's lost in the visuals. Fortunately, nowadays, like you mentioned, places such as PureFlix and like the Kendrick brothers and these other entities have come together and really upped the production value to make them watchable. And so,
big time.
So I think that's a good thing. You mentioned, PureFlix. It's interesting that and I think it's okay, but it's interesting how we have to have these different type of entities out there that will house and kind of just basically be the main point. I mean, it's like you would think that if you went to like a Netflix would want to cash in on, these faith-based movies. And there's a few that you can get on there, but there's a lot that you can't. And so it's just interesting that sometimes, the mainstream, whether it be Hollwyood or whatever the case may be, they want to kind of alienate that market because there's a big consumer market group that you think they could be, making some money off of if they thought of it through that terms. But even then, it's like they want to kind of still alienate that Christian faith because they don't bring it into the mainstream, like perhaps, and here's an example. So Blue Like Jazz, we talked about it. It's one of my favorite movies. Again, it's about a guy who's disenchanted with his church down in Texas and his Christian mother. And so he escapes to a liberal college in Northwest in Oregon. And so it goes through his life. His father's a secular, so he's starting to get advice from his secular father about things, and his dad's totally anti-religion. Anyways, so it's a good movie. But the movie was made possible by the efforts of fans because there wasn't enough backing. And so Kickstarter, which was like a funding website, people donated. I even contributed myself. But we all donated and raised, almost $400,000 so the movie could be made. And it was one of the biggest kind of funded project ever to be made off of Kickstarter. And so the people, the consumer, was the one that actually gave the money for this movie to be made, and it went on to be a decent movie, a good movie. It didn't, wasn't a blockbuster, it wasn't Oscar winning or anything, but it was a true example of the consumer, the Christian, really, this consumer paying for a movie to be made that we can enjoy. And so you would think that something like that would come across to Hollywood and be like, okay, wait a minute, there are some consumers out there that like this content. There are some consumers out there that have money that will spend on this content. And so maybe we should, invest a little bit more time, because obviously what they're doing now, when you look at the ratings of their Oscars and things like that, isn't really going over very well with mainstream America right now.
No, that's a great point, Son. And, a movie, of course, you can hardly talk about, Christian movies without mentioning, The Passion of the Christ. I mean, what Mel Gibson did with that movie was phenomenal. I mean, Jim Caviezel, just incredible. The role he played as playing our Lord, in that movie. And so that's an incredible movie. Of course, extremely violent. So not for not for young kids, even preteens. I mean, you really have to be careful on that one, because it does get so graphic. But speaking of Jim Caviezel, I love a movie he is in called Frequency. And that's another one that just is a really neat story. But I just, he's a great actor. He's a very strong Christian. I mean, he's one of those guys, Son, as you know, that like Mel Gibson, they're there in Hollywood. They're they're not ashamed of the Lord and their relationship with the Lord. I mean, Jim Caviezel, I mean, he's just really out there and bold with it. But I mean, just phenomenal, top line actors, and others. I mean, of course, John Voight and there are plenty of men and women there in the industry, who do love the Lord, and they tend to get shunned, blackballed, I'm sure, many times. But we have to remember, though, Son, I mean, Hollywood, so much of the focus of Hollywood is not coming from folks who have the Lord of the universe living on the inside of them. When you look at the Bible, I mean, you've got some real extremes. You've got, on one hand, in the Bible, you got some people who are actually possessed by demons in the New Testament, and you got people who have the Holy Spirit living in them and Christ living in them through faith. And so you're going to have a different outcome if and obviously there are many unbelievers who aren't possessed by demons, but I'm just giving the real extreme case. Jesus said, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So you've got some real demonic movies, coming out of Hollywood. I mean, movies that, they don't just deal with the supernatural realm, but they, if you're a Christian and you have, of course, then the Holy Spirit living in you, I mean, you can sometimes discern that. I mean, this isn't just an ordinary scary movie like say a Scream movie where it's almost humorous in a way. But I mean, there's a real fearful, almost demonic content to it and spirit with it that you really, really want to stay away from, because it's just not wholesome. It's just not wholesome for the believer. It's not healthy for your soul. It's not something that you need to fill your mind with. But yeah, so Hollywood is a mixed bag, but it seems like 90% of what comes out of there, it seems, is highly questionable in terms of whether it really is going to have any value. Now, I found it interesting. Either my wife or my kids told me that the critics hated the movie The Greatest Showman, and I guess that shouldn't surprise me, Son, because I think a lot of the critics get it wrong too. I mean, many of the critics, they're not going to be looking at the same thing that you and I would look at, and it would make sense that critics or Hollywood, that they would hate a movie where maybe the redeeming value, the message is that at the end of the day, your marriage and your family can satisfy you in ways that chasing after the world never can. And, Nicolas Cage had to learn that there in The Family Man, but it's a really powerful story, very well done, with a great message. And I think you might even have a clip from that one, Son. But yeah, that is just a great, great message that people need to be thinking about.
Yeah, I think at least for me, one of the lines or scenes in the movie was this. And again, it's Nicolas Cage, and maybe okay, you can describe a little bit. Maybe you can set a little bit of the backstory for us, since it's one of your favorite movies. I don't want to take your thunder away. Sure. So give us a little backstory on The Family Man for those that might not know it.
You bet. You bet, Son. So the movie kind of begins, and it shows a college relationship very briefly between Nicolas Cage and then the gal who she played. Her name is slipping my mind, but she did a great job in that role. But anyway, so they were the couple, and they were either engaged or really had started talking about marriage, and he was offered this opportunity in I want to say London. And she's like trying to talk him into, just stay because, I mean, things can change. You're going to go away for a year and then come back, and it was going to all be the same, supposedly. And he wanted it. He wanted that bite out of the apple, and so he left. And then then the movie picks up like, I don't know if it was 10 years later or what it was. And he's like this highly successful, businessman, doing, huge deals with his company, and then he has, I won't tell the whole story, but he basically has like this vision of his dream, and much of the movie then is what it would be like if he had been with Kate, the gal, and if they had these kids that they had. And so the whole story is showing that. So his shock of like, what's happening to me? He's kind of thrown into that situation. But then the more he's in that, the more he finds the fulfillment that relationship with his wife and kids could bring, that he never was able to get, in the world, even though he was being so driven and doing these $1 million deals and everything. So then when he comes back out of that vision and that dream, okay, he wants to go track her down now, because it's like, 10 years later or whatever. And he tracks her down, and she's getting ready. She's getting ready to leave. She's getting ready to leave and go do something in Paris or London or something. And then they have a real powerful moment in the airport where, he talks about how, I've seen how good we can be. He says, I know we could both go our own ways, Kate, we'd probably be fine. But he says, I've seen what we can be together, and I choose us. Which, of course, is the line that she shared then during his vision, that I think that's the clip you're going to play. So during his vision, when he's being torn between, even in his vision, the world and the family, and then he starts, getting a taste back for the things of the world, like expensive suits and this and that, and he tries to even get his job back, in the corporate world and so forth, and like Kate's like, what are you doing? You're acting all crazy. But that's where I think that kind of sets the stage. So your clip is like right there kind of in the middle, or towards the end of the movie, where it's like he is, he's having to decide, am I gonna chase down that dream in the corporate world, or whatever. So that's, that's kind of the stage. So.
Yeah, so here's the clip with Tia Leone talking to Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, that's her name. Yeah,
and this is the kind of one of the main points, so to speak, that hit home when I was watching it.
Yeah.
If you need this, Jack, if you really need this, I will take these kids from a life they love, and I'll take myself from the only home we've ever shared together, and I'll move wherever you need to go. I'll do that because I love you. I love you, and that's more important to me than our address. I choose us.
It's pretty significant because there's a lot of people out there that would choose their job, choose their career, their fun lifestyle, their travel, whatever the case may be. We don't often, well, we don't, but we often live in a world where we put ourselves first and each other down, the narcissistic person in us comes out and we want to choose us, or choose me, not us. In this case, she's choosing us, the family, him, but usually you want to choose me. And so it takes a little bit of us stepping back, I think, to really realize that, there's more to life. We can't take the stuff with us when we go. When we're on a deathbed, I don't think anybody sits there and says, oh, I wish I made more money, or I wish I did this, I wish I did that. It's always, I wish I had spent more time. I wish I had more time I could spend with family. Right. And at that point, the realization is too late. But in this particular instance, there was still time, and that was the point.
Exactly, Son. And Faye Leone, a phenomenal job there with the Nicolas Cage, and I think one of the many lessons that are taught, that gets taught in that movie, Son, is that when key decisions come in a person's life for significant change, and especially if it involves family, or in this case, they were, like I said, they were either engaged or close to being engaged. And of course, she was concerned in the beginning of the movie that if he took off, maybe it wouldn't be the same a year later. So anyway, those critical decisions that get made then can set the stage sometimes for a decade or more. And that's what it did for them. It set the stage for a decade. It was such a critical decision that he made that he left, because then they just didn't keep that relationship going. By the end of the movie, they're having an opportunity to kind of start at that point, 10 years down the road, or whatever it was, 11, 12 years. And so it's a real feel-good movie all the way around, but far more importantly than that, it teaches such an incredible lesson about when people put relationships above their career, materialism, whatever it might be. And obviously, as you and I know, Son, ultimately, it's when you put God, your relationship with God, above anything else. That's by far the most important thing. That of course wasn't addressed in the movie The Family Man, but that wasn't what the movie was about. It was about the marital and family relationships there that Nicolas Cage had missed out on during his climb up the corporate ladder, you know, and he was driven by it. He was good at it. And in fact, there's even a scene where he's like, I think with this woman, and I'm sure, you know, she's probably a prostitute, but, you know, so he's kind of, I mean, that's his sex life. That's his life. No wife, no kids. But he found out how empty that was. So, yeah. So anyway, The Family Man, Nicolas Cage, Faye Leone, fantastic movie.
The other one you mentioned was What About Bob? And what about this? Does this particular clip bring back memories?
Do not see patients on vacation, ever. How many ways can I make that clear? Now, what I'd like you to do is to get on this bus and go back to New York.
I can't. I'm totally paralyzed. I'm all locked up.
You got yourself here.
Barely.
Well, getting back will be therapeutic.
But can't we just have a little talk?
Bob, you are testing my patience.
Come on, I've come so far.
Bob.
I'm baby stepping.
Bob.
I'm doing the work. I'm baby stepping. I'm not a slacker. Check it out. Look at I'm in really bad shape. Come on, please,
Bob.
please.
Bob.
Give me. I need.
Bob.
Give me,
Okay,
please.
all right.
Talk about annoying.
Right.
Bill Murray's character, you know, sitting there hounding Richard Dreyfuss.
Yeah. Oh, it is such a funny movie, Son. And basically, you know, Bill Murray is this neurotic individual who had burned through a bunch of psychiatrists, and now you know, the movie gets going where Richard Dreyfuss, Dr. Leo Marvin, you know, he's just come out with this groundbreaking new book called Baby Steps, you know, and so he's teaching people how to just approach their problems and their fears one step at a time, you know. So anyway, so Bob gets his number from the psychiatrist who he just had burned out last, was actually leaving the business because of it, you know. And so Bob, you know, he gets connected here. And Dr. Leo Marvin had no idea what he was in for. But even from that just little clip there, you know, Dr. Leo Marvin, you know, very highly driven, highly focused. But what was interesting in that movie there, Son, and kind of comparing it to some other, like, say, family movies, is even in that movie, you know, you learn that that Dr. Leo Marvin, he's so driven by his career that he's missing opportunities with his teenage daughter and then his son, Siegfried, I think, and he, or Siegfried rather. So yeah, I had named, how could I forget that? Yeah, named after Freud, you know. So, you know, Dr. Leo Marvin, he's missing opportunities though to connect with his kids and build a relationship with his kids. And then Bob comes in and, you know, he ends up building such a fun relationship with the family, but it's just so hilarious because, you know, Dr. Marvin has this opportunity on Good Morning America to talk about his book, and it so blows up on him because Bob's there, and I won't give it all away, but it's just a riot. And it's so funny because, you know, Dr. Leo Marvin, you know, it's like there's a scene where he says, you know, to Faye, his wife, that after the whole interview was done, he said it was terrible, Faye, and yet she and the kids and Bob are saying, no, you did great, Dad. And, but I mean, the whole thing blew up. And but anyway, it's just a fun movie. You know, a little different angle, obviously, than like The Family Man. But by the end of the story, you know, Dr. Leo Marvin, I think, kind of realizes that he probably was a little bit, you know, it's almost like he's on, you know, this caffeine high for this whole time. He's being driven by that. And the other thing that's funny about it is that Bob, you know, it's like there was a scene where he's teaching Siegfried how to dive off the platform or off the dock there at their little vacation home. And he actually teaches him how to do it. And yet Bob kind of was still playing kind of that role of being very fearful and this and that. But when Siegfried dove into the water, you got a glimpse into the fact that, you know, Bob knew exactly what he was doing. And it was, I mean, in some ways, some of it was an act. He probably did have some, you know, neurotic, you know, fearful, you know, episodes, but it was also just kind of, I think, just kind of a game he played. But then Dr. Marvin, he saw when his son actually was taught how to dive by Bob. So he comes out of the house, he ends up pushing Bob in the water, and then the family, they just all take Bob's side, you know. So Dr. Marvin, I mean, he can't do, you know, his family, they don't understand what's driving him, this interview that he's going to have and all this and that. He feels like Bob's ruining it, but it's just a riot. Richard Dreyfuss and Bill Murray. I would highly recommend. I mean, for years, I think, Son, I would say that, What About Bob was my favorite movie. And so I would still put it in my top 3, if not number 1, but along with, like I say, The Family Man that we talked about. And then the other one that I think we'll talk about is The Greatest Showman with Hugh Jackman.
Yeah, and so I haven't seen The Greatest Showman. I've listened to the music, so I know a little bit about it. But this was one clip that I'll play that I guess kind of started, I guess, his role, or, he's putting together his circus, basically, from what I understand. And it was kind of interesting how in this scene he talks about one thing, and then he spins it to another message, and that message is more inviting. So let me play it, then I'll explain what I mean by that.
Sure.
P.T. Barnum, at your service. I am putting together a show, and I need a star.
You want people to laugh at me?
Well, they're laughing anyway, kid, so might as well get paid. I see a soldier, no, a general, riding across the stage with a sword and a gun and the most beautiful uniform ever made. People will come from all over the world, and when they see him, they won't laugh.
So basically, he's trying to, I guess, recruit some people to join his, what turns out to be the circus, his show. And so he approaches this little guy and wants to have him be the star of the show. And the little guy says, they're just going to make fun of me, laugh at me. And the practical or pragmatic view is like, of course they are. So, you should make money doing it. The guy walks away, no interest. But then P.T. Barnum comes back and has this different approach. You're going to be this majestic general, and you're going to be so impressive that when people come, and he paints the picture and changes it from a negative to a positive, and then it's now more inviting. And then I guess it kind of goes from there. Yeah,
that the whole goal there that P.T. Barnum started to become seduced by was, he had promised his child, they were children. The gal, when she was older in the movie then, is Michelle Williams. She plays Charity Barnum, his wife. But the movie starts with them being children, and then and they were really good friends there as children. And then when it jumps up to the current day, he had promised her this great life, and she came from this really wealthy family, although she was very down to earth, but her dad was a real jerk, toward P.T. Barnum and so forth. And anyway, he just felt like he wanted to give his wife and his daughters something more than what he felt he was giving them. And what she's saying is, hey, I mean, we've got everything, we need, but needless to say, he chases his dreams there then with the circus. And there's another real highfalutin family who is, very much in the popular circles there, the Carlisle family. And then he ends up teaming up with their son, who's played by Zac Efron. And there's quite a romance between Zac Efron and then a girl in the circus. Ann Wheeler played that part. But anyway, but also Zac Efron has to kind of learn that, what his family wants for him. And this is what P.T. Barnum was chasing after, the world. They want to be well respected in the eyes of the elites. But both P.T. Barnum and Zac Efron, came to find out that it's about that authentic relationship. And for P.T. Barnum, it was with his wife, who he practically had just left. I mean, in a way, he was still married and everything, but he was out on the road chasing this for a while. This other girl, lady comes into the picture there, although he didn't go for her at all, but she wanted him. But I mean, all these things that pop up when you are, when you're chasing something other than, really what's going to ultimately satisfy. And, the greatest scene as far as I'm concerned is at the end, when then he and his wife, now they're back together. The circus tent had burned down. There'd been a fire, or their building, I should say, the building the theater that they'd been in. and they're sitting there at their daughter's play, and there's like this great line where he says, you know, when everything you ever want, when everything you ever need is right there in front of you. And it's just so amazing because he had that at the beginning. He and his wife, she saw that. She knew that, you know, she kind of like in the Family Man movie, where Faye Leona was willing to support in Nicolas Cage's vision. She was willing to support his big dreams. Why is it always, not always, but, you know, sometimes the guy, you know, he'll want to chase this or chase that. I mean, sometimes it's the other way around, but in both cases, they want to chase these big things that supposedly are going to make them big wigs in the world. And they come to find out, really their son, how empty that is. But both movies end in a great place. And, you know, Hugh Jackman is just phenomenal, in that movie. You know, and I heard that, my wife or my kids said that critics hated that movie. Well, I'm not surprised, you know, because if you're a critic who doesn't understand the spirit of that movie, who doesn't appreciate the messages that it's teaching, and that and just the acting that was done in that movie, sure, you're going to hate that movie, I suppose. But it's an awesome movie. And I'll say this, Son, there may have been some critics that hated it. It cost them $84 million to make that movie, and their worldwide receipts are nearing $500 million. So, you know, like 400 and, you know, plus $1 million they've made. So, I mean, it obviously, a good thing critics don't have to have the final say on who pays to see the movie. But I would highly recommend The Greatest Showman and The Family Man and What About Bob? And that would give a person or a family, you know, 3 nights of great entertainment and also a lot to talk about, you know, at home about, you know, what really matters. And why are there certain things that drive us that have nothing to do with relationships, either a relationship with God, first and foremost, or a relationship with our spouse if we're married, our kids if we have kids, you know, what is it about these things that we chase? And so anyway, just fantastic movie there, The Greatest Showman.
Like I said, I've seen 2 out of 3. I haven't seen The Greatest Showman, but listened to the music, and it's the music itself is actually really good, so it's worth
it's incredible music.
A watch just for that.
All throughout the film.
And yeah. Hugh Jackman, I think, isn't Hugh Jackman the one that actually literally sings his own parts? Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just it's so good.
See, because he did that, I guess,
in that.
He did that in Les Mis, I think it was, when he did Les Mis, he did the singing, and people were kind of shocked and surprised. And then he followed up with The Greatest Showman. So,
he is so gifted.
Yeah, just from that perspective, the talent that he has.
I mean, Hugh Jackman, Jim Caviezel, some of these actors that we're talking about today, Bill Murray. I mean, what gifts God has given them, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing that it comes down to is the gifts that we have. You know, we can use them for good or we can use them for not. That was one of the things, and I don't want to get off on a tangent, but that was one of the things that was kind of my defense, if I would say, to people that would ask me, why do you listen to secular music? Because it's the same thing. It was like, should we listen to secular music? Only Christian music. Well, the point is that, you know, sometimes the secular music offers me the music styles that I like where the Christian music didn't. You know, I wasn't necessarily wanting to listen to hymns 24/7. I want something meatier, something more rocky. And so my perspective was, you know, I can appreciate the gifts that God gave them. It's just unfortunate that they don't use them for his glory. And so,
it's amazing too, Son, how sometimes, you know, as Christians, I mean, we hear things in a song or in lyrics that maybe others might not. I mean, I remember years ago, and I've heard the song a little bit since then, but when Steve Winwood came out with that song, Higher Love, you know, bring me a higher love. And I think, you know, many Christians probably, they heard that and they thought, man, you know, there is a higher love, and it's found in Jesus, and I mean, so you're right, though, Son. I mean, there's some great songs and great music that it may not be a Christian song, but it's enjoyed by, you know, people whether they're Christian or not, and in some cases, like that song Higher Love, as Christians, we're like, wow. I mean, not that was his point in writing it, but we can look at that from our perspective and realize where that highest love really comes from.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's part of it, too. I've never really reflected it upon that way, but, you know, you can interpret music however you want. You know, there's a lot of songs that people interpreted. Okay, for example, The Police, you know, I'll Be Watching You, that song about, you know, every move you make, I'll be watching you.
Yes.
And a lot of people thought it was a love song, you know, but it turned out to be a a stalker song. You know, the guy that's watching her or watching you is a stalker. And so the meaning behind the song is completely different than what the vast majority of people originally thought it was. So with that being said, we can take songs and maybe that's it. You know, some of the songs I'd listen to, you know, with the lyrics are pretty neutral. You know, like you said, Higher Love. I mean, that could be pretty neutral. And we can interpret it ourselves to fit however we want. So, you know, we can interpret Higher Love, for example, to be us reflecting on what God, being the higher love, is, even though Steve Winwood might not have been meant it to be that way.
Right.
We can interpret it that way, you know? And I think that's one of the things that that I enjoy about music is because it doesn't have to be labeled as I think it was the band Stryper, and Stryper's been up and down with all different kinds of things because of, you know, they're wanting to be recognized as a Christian band, then they're a secular band, and they're back and forth. Right. Anyways, I think what they said was, and it made a lot of sense, was they finally came out with, you know, we're just a band playing music, and we happen to be Christian too. So we don't want to be labeled as a Christian band. We don't want to be labeled as a secular band. We want to be labeled as a band that is made up of Christians. And that makes sense. You know, we're in this world, but we're not of it. So we can be Christians. We can be Christians playing baseball. We can be Christians doing a podcast. We can be Christians being in a band, being a musician. We don't have to be defined by that. It should define who we are. But I don't think it has to define us and be labeled and pigeonholed into that thing. So like when it comes to movies, just because it might not be a faith-based movie or a Christian movie, and then we might be watching Netflix instead of PureFlix, it's okay depending on the movie because there can be things that we can take out of it that fit, you know, our belief in what we've been taught and can make us even reflect upon things. You know, family gives a different perspective on how we can, you know, reflect on our family. It can give us a different perspective on how we reflect on other things. And so, for example, here's talk about Blue Like Jazz. I wanted to play some for you because the movie at the end, there's a scene. And again, I highly recommend it. There's a couple of foul words in it, but it's purposeful if that's even possible. So I give that. But it makes a point at the end. And at the end, there's this, you know, I want to say coming to Jesus moment, but coming back to Jesus moment where the main person in the movie, the kid, makes it about him, but it's also about what he's done wrong, and he comes to terms with that. So let me play a clip, and then we can maybe delve into it a little bit more. So here's the first clip.
I'm ashamed of Jesus because I want you to like me. I want you to think I'm smart or sophisticated or whatever. It's like Jesus is the geek in the cafeteria sitting by himself, and I'm the guy pretending he's not my friend.
You know, how many times, Dan, have, you know, we made Jesus that geek in the cafeteria for the sake of, you know, whatever it is in the world? I mean, there's been times where, you know, I've done that, where, you know, I'm not going to really profess my faith. I'm going to keep it quiet because, you know, I want to be a part of the in crowd, or I just don't want to bring it up, or, you know, I might be ostracized, whatever the case may be. And yet, you know, we try to justify that, but in reality, you know, that's all we're doing. We want to be cool. And so, you know, Jesus is now, you know, the nerdy guy in the cafeteria that we don't want anything about. We don't want any part of.
Right.
And it's just one of those things that hit home when I was watching the movie that, you know, you know, I can do that. I can do that knowingly, and I can do that willingly, depending on the situation. But also, you know, I need to come to terms with the fact that that's wrong, and I shouldn't do that, because in the end, the only thing that matters is Jesus first, and then sharing his witness to anybody else.
Yeah, that's right, Son. It was interesting. If we kind of merge a couple things that we're talking about here today, this example you just gave of the guy in the movie who kind of went through that epiphany of where he realized how he was basically like Peter denying the Lord. I mean, not just basically, he was. I mean, he was denying the Lord in his heart for sure, and probably publicly. I mean, and you know, we have to remember what Jesus said. You know, if you're ashamed of me, you know, before men, I'll be ashamed of you before my Father in heaven. So it's nothing to play around with. If you're going to profess to be a believer, you'd be ashamed of the Lord. But that's human nature. That's sinful man. And so, I mean, you know, not to beat up the guy, just to say that he recognized that. He recognized that was not what the Lord was leading him to do. But then I take it to that next level, Son, where the actors themselves have to basically address what you were talking about before we just got onto this topic just a moment ago. You're talking about how we are called to be a light for the Lord, whatever we're doing, whether it be working at a radio station or as a teacher or whatever it might be. But then I think about like these actors, these actresses, Son, who maybe they read a script and then in their lines, I mean, they love the part and everything, but in their lines, they would be asked to say something so vulgar, so offensive, so wicked, that they would actually use the Lord's name as a curse word. They would take the Lord's name in vain, and maybe there's a director, the folks putting on the movie, they want that. Well, now as a Christian, can I, for $1, for $1 million, can I go on the big screen and take the Lord's name in vain with as much of a violation as that is to God? I mean, it's one of the commandments that's so important to God. It's so vulgar. It's so offensive. And, it's no surprise, Son, that on so many television networks and movies, I mean, it's just sickening how often you'll hear the Lord's name taken in vain. But I have to think about those Christians in the industry who have been put in that situation, and that's a test. That's a test of faith. Basically, it's like, will you commit this vulgar sin against the Lord because we're going to pay you a lot of money to do the movie? I mean, that has to be a huge test, because taking the Lord's name in vain is not a minor issue. That is a huge, huge issue. It's very, very important to God that we do not profane his name. I mean, so much so, like I say, I mean, it's right up there in the commandments at the top. I mean, near the very top, because it's so important to the Lord. And yet you hear it being done over and over and over again. And of course, the devil wants people to take the Lord's name in vain. And like I say, that's a case then, Son, where a Christian in the industry will have an opportunity to say, hey, now, wait a minute, I guess maybe to relate it to people like maybe in the world, it would be like, if they paid you enough, would you curse your mother in a movie, And hopefully the unbeliever would say, no, I wouldn't. Well, you're asking me to do something even worse than that. You're asking me to curse my Lord, my Savior. So it could be a great opportunity to witness to the director. And I don't want to paint it as though it's an unforgivable sin if a Christian were to do that in a movie, but my goodness. I would hope that every Christian in the industry would realize that if it came to that, if it came to you either getting the part, if you take the Lord's name in vain, or not getting the part, well, I mean, the Lord said there's going to be a cost to discipleship. I mean, what little cost? I mean, okay, so you don't make $1 million for that movie, big deal. You haven't gone on the big screen and modeled for impressionable people, young people especially. It's okay to take the Lord's name in vain, when it's one of the worst things really a person can do. And yet you hear it all the time. You hear people say Jesus' name is a curse word. You'll hear people, say damn, after God's name. And it's just so offensive to the Lord. It's so vulgar. It's so wicked. And again, I'm not trying to say that people who do that are like quote unquote bigger sinners. I mean, I'm just saying, Son, we have to raise the bar on that issue for folks. And I think, people in the movie industry, they have an opportunity in Hollywood to take a stand on that issue and say, I'm not going to do that. There's no way I'm going to do that. I mean, if you don't want me in this part, so be it. But I am not going to profane the name of the one who left heaven to come to earth and die for my sins on the cross and give me eternal life in heaven. And you want me to profane his name? No, forget it. Find somebody else if you have to do that. So it's an opportunity, I think, for a Christian to really take a stand.
I'm still trying to figure out how Jesus' middle initial became H. You hear that oftentimes in the movies, and I'm like, where'd that even come from? It's the influence, like you said, it's the influence that people have, and people emulate that because they elevate these actors, athletes, whomever it might be. They elevate them, and then they want to emulate them. And so what is it as a Christian are we wanting to model? Are we wanting to model the things of this world? Maybe profanity, maybe, things like that. Or do we want to model, what Jesus was like, the biblical Jesus, what he was truly like and what he came for. I want to play one more clip because it's another significant point in the movie. And let me just play it, then we can talk about it.
Sure.
I'm confessing to you that I'm tired of being a hypocrite. and a coward. I need you to forgive me. Do you forgive me?
I wouldn't know what to forgive you for.
Do you forgive me for misrepresenting God? He isn't like me. He isn't afraid. And he isn't a coward. And he isn't a hypocrite. And he isn't like that messed up priest who raped you when you were a kid. I should have told you that a long time ago. Will you forgive me?
So he's talking about the misrepresentation of Jesus that he portrayed in his life. And how often do we do that? We paint, Jesus is to the world how we paint him, how we reflect him, how we act, how we talk, how we are. And so if we're up on the big screen, profanity, if we're in our sexual situations on the big screen, whatever the case may be, lyrics in songs, these talented people with writers that, write about this, in our daily life, in the boardroom, in the classroom, delivering packages, whatever the case may be, we are the witness to who Jesus is, and the world is going to see him as, through us. So how many times do you hear people say, I don't believe in Jesus because all the hypocrisy that goes on? And that was the point in the beginning of the part of this movie was the mom went to church. The kid was supposed to go to Christian college. The pastor was, mentoring the kid. Maybe he was going to be the next pastor. And then the mom and the pastor have a relationship. She ends up having getting pregnant, and it just and he sees the hypocrisy in all this. And so he goes to his dad, who is a non-believer. And his dad's like, dude, go to Reed College. I'll pay for it. And he goes off to this liberal college. And then it's coming to terms with his faith and all this that he's seen. And so the world's going to look at us through the lens of how we portray who Jesus is. And do we sit him in the cafeteria? He's the geeky guy. Do we misrepresent him, and paint a false picture of who he is? And we're the ones that are the insecure. We're the ones that are the ones doing wrong, not Jesus. Jesus hasn't done anything wrong. We portrayed him as a wrong person by the wrongness and how we act.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And, I think that's a wonderful clip that you just played, and my goodness, I mean, thankfully, we can learn from our behavior and hypocrisy and double-mindedness and bad sinful behavior, and we can learn from that, and we can confess it to the Lord, and He will forgive us, and that's what Jesus' death on the cross is all about. And all of us who know the Lord, we're a work in progress. So we're certainly not perfect, but we're trying to please the Lord who redeemed us there at the cross. So yeah, that clip is just so powerful in terms of the change that Jesus will make in us, how the Holy Spirit will come and convict us of sin and yet lead us to that place of forgiveness and a clean slate. And my goodness, how blessed we are.
The other thing too that is kind of interesting when you take a look at Hollwyood and you look at things, like we talk about the issues of this world through a biblical perspective, and how I can understand because, one of the writers involved in creating the screenplay for this movie was Steve Taylor. He's a musician. He was also a musician. He's a movie producer. He's a musician, Christian guy. He wrote a song one time that was the title is "It's Harder to Believe Than Not To," and it goes through some of the things why it's harder to believe in Jesus than not to. And there's some truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that. It's hard to believe in something we can't see. It's hard to believe in something that isn't tangible. And so we look to the evidence, so to speak, surrounding whatever it is that we're trying to believe in. So, for example, if you believe in UFOs, you believe in aliens and ET and space people and little green men, you're going to look to Roswell. You're going to look to lights in the sky. You're going to try to find evidence to prove what it is you can't prove, because you need the evidence to surround it. I mean, it happens in court all the time. You need the evidence to prove a case. And so if you can't understand Jesus, if you can't understand God, if you can't see him, if you can't realize that he's real, if he is intangible to somebody, then somebody's going to look to the evidence around him, Christians, the church, things like that, to try to put into place who Jesus is, who God is, try to make tangible. And when that evidence is tainted, and when we taint that evidence and we give that false portrayal to God. But the thing is this, is that when you look at the Hollywoods of the world and those type of institutions that people emulate and try to, and take as their influences, it all ends in a decay. It all ends in something bad. No, I'm not talking about like every single instance, but it's not going to get you anywhere. The morality, the good living, it's not teaching a positive message on a whole. There's greed, there's sexual immorality, there's, like you said, the profanity, there's the drinking, there's a message coming from Hollywood of what is cool, and that leads to a path of destruction. Then we look over here to the Bible, and it has a message that is, I don't want to say strict, but it has guidelines. It has things that we should adhere to for a better living. It gives us, things that we should do if we want to live in eternity with Jesus. Basically, it's telling us to, we have to give up the worldly things, the pleasures of the world. And that's hard to do when you're putting your faith in something that is just that, faith. It's for by faith we are saved, for by grace we are saved through faith. It's our belief in what God is. It's our belief in what the Bible is telling us. And eventually that belief will pay off and will come true, and we'll see the tangibility of what we're believing in. But it's basically faith. And it's like, we take on faith that we're just going to breathe, that the air is there. And anyway, so the long point to my talking here is that, where do we put our faith in? Where do we put our influences? What is it that it's going to take for us to realize that the Bible, like Jesus said, he's the only way, and that's the way for us to believe. We might not always follow it. We might purposefully or unpurposely break it and violate it and do things that become a bad witness, things like that. But it's just interesting how people, when you sit down and you listen to people and what their influences are, and even the movies, we've talked about a few good movies here. There's a couple other movies like Facing the Giants, The Blind Side, The Hiding Place, movies that are out there that people could watch. It's almost like the standard of movies and the standard of Hollywood continues to drop, continues to get more into that gutter. And people still want to follow that. The music of today still gets worse and worse, the lyrics worse and worse. And yet people want that. They want to consume that. And it's yet, they don't realize the toll it takes on the soul. Whereas the Bible, there might be some things that we have to give up in this world, but anything in there is going to make our soul grow and feel better and give us a better feel about ourselves and make us happy. It's not going to be, wine and roses here on out if we follow Jesus, but the journey is going to be so much better than that which we see for people that kind of emulate and follow what Hollywood standards are today.
Well, that is 100% correct, Son. It definitely is going to provide fulfillment, peace, forgiveness, salvation, eternal life. A moment ago you said how it just seems to be getting worse and worse, in Hollywood. And it reminds me of what I preached on this past Sunday from Genesis 6. And I won't go into all that. It would be fun here at some point, maybe even soon. It'd be fun to go into this over a podcast, because there's one, hell, the word hell in the New Testament, the English word hell, it's not always the same word in the Greek that they get translated hell. For example, the rich man in Luke 16 who was in hell, he was in Hades. And he said, I'm in agony in this fire. And the Bible says in Hades, where he was in torment. So that was Hades. What I sometimes have referred to as like the county jail of hell, because judgment day hasn't happened yet. You haven't gone before the judge. But then the example, the verse that I was then diving into a good bit on Sunday is one I've never really quite understood until I prepared this message. 31 years as a pastor, I've never preached on really what Jude 1:6, when it talks about how God has placed some of these demons in chains of everlasting darkness, and how they abandon their own home, their own domain. Now, without going into the whole thing, Son, basically, I came to see, and many Christians, Bible students and Bible scholars have linked Jude and 2 Peter 2:24 with Genesis 6 over the years. And without giving it all away, just basically to say there is this Greek word Tartarus. And Tartarus is defined as really the lowest abyss of hell. And so when you talk about Hollywood going deeper and deeper, man can go deeper and deeper into his sinful nature, it seems, but there are also, if you will, like these levels of hell, and then ultimately even Hades, the Bible says, will be tossed into the lake of fire. But Tartarus is translated hell in the English, but it's the lowest abyss in hell. And that would be an interesting discussion. The Bible talks about giants. It talks about demons having sexual relationships with women back there in Genesis, producing the Nephilim. These giants. I mean, that would be a very interesting talk. But I preached on that really for the first time, probably in 31 years. That led me to do some digging on, because whenever I came across those verses, Son and Jude and Peter, that talk about these demons being in darkness, I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. A lot of demons don't seem to be in darkness. They're out and about, in the world. And so what's going on? So we walked through all that. And it's just very interesting. And the last little teaser I'll give on that is, when Jesus came across that demon-possessed man, and the demons, said, he asked their name. They said, we're legion because we are many. It's interesting that in Matthew's account of that story, the demons were terrified of what Jesus might do, where he might send them. And so they said, if you come to torture us before the appointed time. And so there's a whole lesson there about Christ's victory over the devil, over the demonic realm, much of what Hollywood seems to celebrate and make money on. They're making money on demonic things sometimes. Not many movies, as many we've cited today aren't that way, but there are plenty that are. And the other thing I was just going to say real quickly, Son, is when you're talking about, faith and evidence and so forth, many of the new atheists, within the last, maybe 10 years ago or whatever, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, those folks, Sam Harris, I mean, they famously would make this very, just ridiculous comment. They don't know really what they're talking about. They say, well, belief, referring to Christian belief especially, belief is something where you're putting your faith in something where there is no evidence. But they don't understand really on this at all, Son, is that Christianity is an evidence-based faith. We're not just believing in some pie in the sky, thing that does not have historical roots, that does not have evidence behind it. I mean, we've talked before in these podcasts about the evidence for the resurrection. I mean, at the end of the day, you're either going to believe the evidence or not. You're either going to believe that these scared disciples, like Peter, who denied the Lord, either they saw the risen Lord and they went out and became martyrs, many of them, which they did, or you're going to have to come up with some other excuse for why they went out and would have had to have been, preaching a message that they would have known was a lie. And nobody's ever done that in history. Nobody's died for a lie knowing it's a lie. So there's a lot of evidence for the resurrection. There's a lot of evidence for Christianity. There's a lot of evidence in the lives of Christians who've started so many hospitals and orphanages and homeless shelters and all these things. So Christianity is an evidence-based faith, but you've got some atheists out there who, because they choose not to believe, they want to convince others that there's no evidence for it, and nothing could be further from the truth. So there's so much going on, in the world with these issues, and I'm just thankful, Son, for your podcast and exposing a lot of these things and getting the truth out there, the true gospel, that we're saved by grace through faith in Jesus, that heaven is our eternal home. And then we try to make wise decisions on these issues we're talking about, daily living and careers and movies and everything else, and so God will help us. The Holy Spirit will guide us. And this is one way that we, encourage one another in the faith by talking about these things and then having people ask questions and so forth.
Dan Delzell with us as always. We appreciate your time, your thoughts, your comments, and for joining us on these conversations. And if people want to reach out, where can they find you?
I tell you, Son, they could text or email me at Dan Delzell at cox.net, DANDELZELL at cox.net. Or they can look up our church, Redeemer in Papillion, on Facebook and find some information there. But the email would be great if anybody would like to reach out and has a question or anything and kind of continue the conversation that we've started today. And if they'd like to become part of it, I'd be more than happy to visit with someone, especially through email or even over the phone if that was something that could be helpful.
And for those of you that would like to reach out to me, you can find me on Instagram at EidemRocks, EIDEMROCKS at EidemRocks, and you can DM me there. Or you can also just use my name, Sonn Eidem at Gmail, too, and reach out that way. But if you have any questions or anything and really want to get a little bit more in-depth, Dan might be a great resource for you to reach out and talk to. Dan, again, we appreciate it. Thank you so much, and we look forward to next time.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Son. Thank you for all you're doing and just for allowing me to share this time with you on your podcast.
And for those of you listening, thanks for listening, and do tell a friend. And until next time, God bless.